Good day. This is Sam Kemble with Workforce Delivery Inc. It is May 23rd, 2018, and I hope you're having a good day. Today, I was inspired to do just a little video on the topics of joyful effort, competence, and attitude as it relates to performance outcome with particular focus on at-work behavior. And if you like this or find this video useful, please click on the logo in the bottom corner and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you can get notifications of future videos. Take care. So why did I want to talk about this today? Well, this morning I was having my cup of coffee and scrolling through my Twitter feed, and I came across a tweet which was a repost of a story that was issued originally in May of 2015 by a submission made to the Financial Post. And the title of the story was Alberta's NDP leaders will be more like kids running the candy store. And the body of that news article at the time went into the lack of political experience that much of the newly elected legislature contained, particularly under the NDP umbrella. And there was some musings as to how a cabinet might be formed with this group of representatives that, again, lack political experience. Now, the inference of retweeting it today by Alberta Can't Wait is basically to imply that one of the reasons we're in the situation we're in today is because of we have a legislature made up of doctors, social workers, folks who work manual labor in small business and in unions who have worked with unions in the past as opposed to career politicians, and that didn't quite rub me the right way. So that is what motivated me to get behind the camera today. And then, without expecting it, but I guess I'm not really surprised now that I think of it, it was actually Jason Kenney that came to the rescue, if you will, by replying to that tweet and indicating that he disagreed with the notion that you had to be a career politician in order to be an effective politician. And he also noted that laborers, teachers, social workers, and those small business people and farmers make great legislators. So basically discounted that notion that you needed to have political experience and expertise in order to be effective in the provincial legislature. He went even further to compliment Brian Mason, and noting that Brian Mason is one of the more effective legislators currently in Alberta, and his background is as a bus driver. And Jason noted that to be an effective bus driver, you have to have discipline, conscientiousness, you have people's lives in your hands, and that care and concern and those characteristics are the types of things that make people good at being representatives of their community. So as an HR person, this got me thinking again, and it's always good to self-reflect and revisit. But if character is not about what you do, it's how you do it. And that's the premise of what my thought process is, and I think that's why I had the reaction to that original tweet. Seems to be the reaction of Jason Kenney's response as well, or the driver of Mr. Kenney's response. But if it's not what you do, it's how you do it, then what's it all about? What is it that builds the character and that prepares us to be useful to others? And the Dalai Lama's got a few ideas around this. One is, and I've always kind of liked this, is simply that we have to make a sustained effort again and again to cultivate the positive aspects within us. So it's actually a sustained effort, wash, rinse, repeat, that cultivates positive aspects within us, i.e. character. And then the other thing that kind of jumped out at me is I went back and looked at it because it just this topic got me thinking again about it. But just the 6 perfections of the Dalai Lama's art of living, and each is a prerequisite to the next. So first of all, the art of giving is one of the highest attainments, but in order to do that, one has to have ethical discipline, and in order to do that, one has to be able to have the ability to bear hardships and adverse circumstances. And in order to do that, a person has to have the ability to exert joyful effort. And in order to exert joyful effort, a person has to have the ability to concentrate and focus on events, actions, or goals. And in order to do that, at the very beginning, a person has to have the power of judgment. So it's actually kind of rolls up the opposite way in terms of how it's set out, because each is a prerequisite or a stepping stone to the next. And I always thought that passage just kind of hit me, and it would be in about page 35 of The Art of Living, if you have a copy of that Dalai Lama's book there. So, but this has me reflecting on my earlier career paths. If it's not what we do, then let's just kind of drill this down to a fairly basic amount. It's how we do it. And first of all, I grew up on a farm, so we always had chores to do. We had animals to take care of on a daily basis. Whether it didn't matter what the weather was like, things had to get done. So I always have kind of a certain respect for folks. I guess a slight bias in favor of folks who have grew up on a farm, because we know that you have a sense, unless they had people doing it for them, that kids who lived on a ranch or a farm typically had to do some work early on. In addition to that, though, my first job was a janitor, housekeeping, and I did that for 7 years, first at the General Hospital and then at the Foothills Hospital down in Calgary. And then to put myself through school, I tree planted. Now that's an interesting one, so it's worth taking a look at that. Now, tree planting is hard work, and I thought, and I did, I knew what hard work was like, being a farm kid. But I remember my first day of tree planting. It was something different. I didn't have anything left in the tank. My back was sore. My whole body just ached. After 10 hours of work and I'm getting paid 9 cents a tree, I owed money. I didn't even make enough to make my camp costs. So after working pretty much the hardest day of my life, I actually owed money, because I had a lot of good attitude. I had to get up and go. It wasn't through lack of effort. I just didn't have the skill and competence to do it. And even after all that, I still lost money. But it didn't end there. I did it for 7 years, and it was kind of a fun lifestyle. I enjoyed it. And over that period of 7 years, I planted just under 1 million trees. Now, if you actually planted 1 million trees on a linear path, it would take you about halfway around the world. So that's just kind of an order of magnitude of how many trees those are. Anyways, I love it. It was great. It was hard work, and it was character building to a T. And in fact, I think if folks who wanted to tweet about environmental things had to first throw on a bag and shovel and spend a few summers out in the bush, I think the world would be a better place. We'd have a lot more trees and a lot less whining. But that's another topic. At the end of the day, the repetitive nature of tree planting, it was the same thing over and over and again, is no doubt a fairly good laboratory experiment, if you will, of character building. Just like the Dalai Lama said, we have to make a sustained effort again and again. And with tree planters, it's again and 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 again, to cultivate the positive aspects within us. And one thing that I did note when I was tree planting, I kind of learned this early on, is if I wasn't quite feeling it one day and I didn't feel like really giving it my all, I would come back after the 10 hours still just as tired as I was on another day, but I'd only have made like $80 or $90, and which once you get good at it, that isn't a whole lot. But if I gave it my all and just put everything into it, came back after 10 hours and I made $270. I wasn't any more tired. I didn't feel any more tired at the end of those days as I would have when I kind of dogged it. So for me, it was the attitude. The attitude really made a huge difference, and the energy that was spent, or the fatigue that was created, was also impacted by the attitude that I carried through. Not just the physical exertion, but also the attitude, and it left an impression. But again, this comes back down to character. It doesn't matter what you do as long as you do it well and you apply that. You have an opportunity to practice exerting joyful effort and concentrating and focusing on your actions. That is what builds the character, no matter what the occupation or what you do, that will translate into other character in other ways that will make you useful to others, or whether it be in the legislature or in other things. So the capacity to exert joyful effort is something that we cultivate over our lifetime. And competence is something that we accumulate, individuals accumulate in their lifetime through training and experience. And attitude is something that we choose every day. Now, it would be naive to say that competence doesn't matter. And I think that's part of the gist of the Alberta Can't Wait tweet. And in construction sites, this is not lost on us. In fact, just the example on my silly tree planting example, my first day in the job was I had a significant capacity to exert joyful effort and a good attitude, but after 10 hours of spinning my wheels, I owed $10 at the end of the day. So it's naive to say that competence doesn't matter at all. And the key, though, I think, in construction and maintenance sites deal with this all the time, is to identify the right mix. And construction does that. Construction and maintenance is all about that. It's about putting together teams of the right people to get the work done. And there's additional layers of complexity because of there's multiple craft disciplines that are involved in performing certain aspects of the job. And so anyways, we're used to getting the right mix. It's not just the right mix, though, of craft discipline, but it's the right mix of experience. So we focus a lot on apprenticeship ratios. And in construction and maintenance, there's skilled trades. Essentially, we have a culture of training the next generation behind us through the journeyman apprenticeship relationship. But there's a focus on the apprenticeship ratios, and the ratios have to be enough to train, not hoard all the work, to give lots of opportunities for young people and new people coming into the new trade, and also folks from different diverse backgrounds into the trades. We want to make sure there's accessibility. And in addition, there's also I want to ensure that we don't go too high on the apprenticeship ratios, depending on the complexity of the work, because someone has to be there to give a hand to the people who don't quite know all the tricks. And it's actually the core group of experienced folks that drive a project and also influence those lesser experienced around them. So yes, it's about the right mix. It's about getting people there at the right time and the right absorption rate. And I just want to speak to that as well. So in addition to competencies about from a trade perspective or professional perspective, there's also a knowing of what kind of rules and expectations are established by the management of the site. And this is about managing the work. So managers and leaders set up expectations around safety, productivity, quality, and attendance, attitude as well. They set up these expectations. The sites typically start fairly small, and there's a core buildup of folks who are buying into those principles and values. And then as new people join the site, it's not just management that drives those behaviors or implements those social norms. It's actually just the existing core group of employees there's a site culture that new people are exposed to, and for example, the culture is zero harm, zero safety incidences, and zero harm. You want to make sure that your absorption rate is such that it's not exceeding the amount that existing core group of people can absorb, and still instill that zero injury culture, zero harm culture onto the new entrants. So yes, we need to ramp up with the right mix, right people, and also not ramp up at a pace that exceeds the amount that would then dilute, if you will, the positive culture and work rule expectations to make the site, to ensure that the site and the effort continues to be manageable. So that's what I talk about: competency mix and ramping up. In construction, this is all about construction and industrial maintenance. This is what we do for a living, and we're used to it. So that kind of is not lost on many people in the industrial industry. But attitude matters. So getting back to what Alberta Can't Wait was tweeting about, is there's a frustration in that tweet, and there's a frustration in the revisiting it of how did we get to where we are today? And there's a slight dissatisfaction about that. And of course, they're looking at the current government to see what was going on. And again, if joyful effort is something that can be cultivated, and Jason Kenney's saying that anyone can be a representative if they've have the character, that's essentially is what he's saying, that the competence will follow. So what's the missing ticket here? And I've got an example that might point to that here as follows. A grievance that I had a few years ago comes to mind, and it was in regards to a termination of a job steward. The job steward was competent in the person's trade, and so competency was not an issue, but was terminated for use of a phone, and I'll get into the details in a moment, during work times on the work site. Now, companies with in my opinion, best practices afford job stewards on their work site the similar access to communication tools that they would customarily afford a foreman. And on some sites, no one can have a cell phone, for example. It's just not safe. And that would typically be a downstream oil and gas site in a live operating plant. But on many sites that are, still safety sensitive but don't have those kinds of risks, cell phones are permitted by supervision. And again, companies that I think afford best practices would afford a job steward similar access to phones so that they can conduct union business. And like almost not just best practices but minimum standards, typically collective agreements afford job stewards time to do union business, reasonable amount of time to do union business during working hours. Now, the purpose of this, or the reason for this termination, was the job steward in question was running a business over the phone during working hours, running a personal business over the phone during working hours, and claiming that the individual was conducting union business when that was later found not to be the case. And it wasn't just any business, not that it was, it just could afford some embarrassment, if you will. But the individual was actually running a business selling sex toys. I don't know if it was some kind of pyramid scheme or whatever, but over the phone during working hours, and using the entitlements that person was afforded as a job steward in order to do so. So we ended up terminating the individual, and it went to a grievance hearing. Now, to respect the individual's dignity, and I am a fan of that, I approached the union representative, not the job steward, but the representative who was acting on behalf of the individual in the hearing, simply to say, look, you know, there's very little value from my perspective in the arbitration panel hearing that the individual was selling sex toys on our job site. So I don't think it enhances the outcome of the hearing from my perspective. As long as you concede that the individual was running a business, I don't need to get into what kind of business it was. And the union representative handling the file seemed to be appreciative of the notion. I think he was kind of dreading the idea of having that kind of conversation. So was appreciative of that, and I just said, look, in exchange for that, I was hoping that you could just stay away from the supervisor in anger at the time of the termination used the F-bomb. So if you want to just stay away from that expletive used by the supervisor at the time of termination, we can just focus on the reasons for the termination and argue on those points. To which the business representative and we agreed. Now we went into hearing, and I held up my end of the bargain, and didn't get into what kind of business it was. Just that there was a business being operated on work time, and the individual, not the union representative, but the individual just couldn't hold up their end of the bargain and went into this big diatribe over how there was a swear word used by the supervisor, who was clearly frustrated by the job steward continuing to take such liberties with work time. In any event, the outcome of that was the termination was turned over, but $1 in back damages. So with no reinstatement, and just as a symbolic effort, the arbitration panel awarded $1 in damages to be paid by the employer to the employee, just for the expletive at the time of the termination. But here's a pretty good example of, competence wasn't an issue. I don't really have much outside of the individual did achieve a journeyman status in the person's trade, so I can presume that the individual must have had some fortitude to exert joyful effort, if you will. So competence and joyful effort was not the issue in terms of why this was not successful, but it really just came down to attitude. A lack of respect for the work, lack of respect for the employer, lack of respect for the person, lack of respect for the person's trade, lack of respect for the person that the individual was representing. And that's what went sour on this. It wasn't what the person was doing, it was how they were doing it. Just like the exchange between Alberta Can't Wait and Jason Kenney's tweet. Now again, I'm still always, it's important to me when administering these kind of cases to uphold the dignity as much as possible of the individual involved. So we also, leading into this was in advance of the hearing, but we also had another request on the part of the union, and it was a means to maintain the individual's dignity while the individual was grieving the employer for the termination. So I did have a request, and I did concede, and would again today. But turned out that the individual was a candidate, an NDP candidate in the provincial election. So as to not deter or detract from that individual's chances of being elected to the Alberta legislature, there was a request that we delay the hearing until after the election was held, and we did concede that.